Sarah sat on the worn-out couch, her hands gently stroking Max's matted fur. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of Max's labored breathing. The once vibrant dog, full of life and energy, was now frail and weak, his eyes clouded with age. Max had been Sarah's companion for over a decade, and though he was no longer the playful puppy that had bounded into her life all those years ago, his presence was as comforting as ever. But today, Sarah knew, deep down, what was coming. Max had been slowing down for months, but recently his health had taken a sharp decline. The vet had warned her that his time was running out. The words "end of life" had been used so many times that Sarah couldn't hear them without feeling her heart ache. The bond between her and Max was unlike any other. He had been there through her darkest days, always by her side, with a wag of his tail or a comforting nudge when she needed it most. She couldn't fathom the thought of losing him. Today, she had made the decision. It was time to take him to the vet, to say goodbye. But as she sat beside him, watching him struggle to lift his head, she wondered if she was ready. She wasn't sure if anyone could ever truly be ready to lose a best friend. Max let out a soft sigh and shifted closer to her. Sarah wiped the tears that had begun to fall and smiled at him. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You've been the best dog anyone could ever ask for. I love you so much." In that moment, something unexpected happened. Max, despite his weakness, pushed himself up and slowly crawled into Sarah's lap. It was slow and painful, but he managed. His fur, once thick and soft, now felt thinner beneath her hands, but it was still familiar. As he settled against her, he reached up and placed his front paws gently on her shoulders, hugging her in a way that only a dog could. Sarah's heart broke, but it also swelled with love. Max was giving her one last moment of connection, one final gesture that told her, in his own way, that he wasn't ready to leave her yet. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she held him tighter, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She whispered again, her voice barely above a breath, "I'm going to miss you so much, Max." Max's eyes met hers with a calmness that made her feel both comforted and crushed at the same time. He nuzzled into her neck, his warm breath against her skin, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though time had stopped, just the two of them, alone in their little world. Sarah knew that the time to say goodbye was coming soon, but for now, she allowed herself to savor this one last hug, one last moment of love, of comfort, and of everything that made Max her loyal friend. The drive to the vet's office was long and quiet. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white from the tension. Max, curled up in the passenger seat beside her, let out a soft groan every so often, his head resting on the seat cushion. His breath was shallow, and Sarah could feel the weight of his decline with every passing second. She kept glancing at him, her heart breaking at the sight of him so frail, so far from the energetic dog he once was. The vibrant Max, who used to jump out of the car excitedly, tail wagging and ready for adventure, was now just a shell of himself. The car's engine hummed steadily, but inside, Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the years they had spent together, the walks in the park, the way Max would run circles around her, the mornings when he would jump into her bed and curl up beside her. Those memories played in her mind like a slideshow, each one reminding her of how much she loved him, how much he had meant to her. And now, all of that was slipping away. She had promised him that she would do what was best for him, but the decision to let him go felt impossible. A lump formed in Sarah's throat, and she fought back the tears that threatened to spill over. She knew the time had come. Max's health had deteriorated too much for there to be any hope of recovery. The vet had confirmed it. And yet, despite all the logic and reasoning, her heart refused to accept it. How could she say goodbye to the dog who had been there for her through every high and low? Max stirred beside her, his eyes opening just slightly as he looked up at her. His gaze, though tired, seemed to carry an understanding that Sarah couldn't explain. He blinked slowly, and for a brief moment their eyes met. She felt a pang of guilt and love all at once. Was he really ready to go? Could she do this to him? Could she be the one to make the choice to end it all? The drive felt like an eternity. The streets blurred by, and Sarah's mind spun in circles. She tried to focus on the road, but all she could think about was Max, his fragile body, and the uncertainty that hung in the air. What would life be like without him? How would she live without the constant presence of his loyal companionship? As they neared the vet's office, Sarah's stomach churned. The familiar building loomed ahead, its bright sign flashing in the distance. She knew what she had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. She pulled into the parking lot and parked the car, her hands shaking as she put it into park. Max let out a soft whimper, and Sarah looked over at him. His eyes met hers once more, a silent plea in them. For a moment, she hesitated. Maybe there was still time. Maybe there was still hope. But the reality set in as she opened the door. She had made the hardest decision of her life. She would have to say goodbye. She gently lifted Max from the car, his body lighter than she remembered. Holding him close, Sarah took one last look at the world outside, the place that had been home to both of them for so many years. The warmth of the sun on her face, the familiar scent of the air, it all felt so bittersweet. With a heavy heart, Sarah walked into the vet's office, ready to face the painful decision that would change both their lives forever. Inside the vet's office, the familiar antiseptic smell filled the air. Sarah's hands trembled as she gently placed Max on the examination table, trying not to jostle him too much. He whined softly, his body clearly aching from the movement. Sarah stroked his fur, speaking to him in soothing whispers. "It's okay, Max. We're almost done. Just a little longer." Dr. Hayes, the veterinarian, walked in with a warm, professional smile, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. He had been the one to diagnose Max's condition in the first place, and she knew he understood how much this moment meant. He'd always been kind, but today, even he seemed unsure. "Hi, Sarah," he greeted gently, taking a quick glance at Max. "How is he doing today?" Sarah forced a smile, but the tears were still close to the surface. He's struggling. I think it's time." She couldn't hold it back anymore, the sorrow pooling in her chest. "I don't want him to suffer any longer." Dr. Hayes nodded sympathetically, his face lined with experience. "I understand, Sarah. We've talked about this before. Let me take a look at him." He began his examination, checking Max's heart rate and breathing. The room was silent except for the soft clicks of his stethoscope and the occasional murmur of Sarah reassuring Max. Dr. Hayes ran his hands down Max's frail body, his face neutral but focused. Sarah tried to keep herself together, but it was hard. She felt as though her world was slowly unraveling. Every touch, every glance at Max reminded her that she was about to lose him. And yet, despite the heaviness of the moment, something felt off. Something didn't quite add up. After a few minutes, Dr. Hayes paused and glanced at Sarah, his brow furrowed. He placed the stethoscope back in its case, his eyes a little wider than usual. "Sarah," he began slowly, "I'm hearing something unusual with his heart. This isn't what I expected." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Dr. Hayes leaned over to listen again, his expression more serious now. "Max's heartbeat. It's faint, yes, but it's irregular in a way I haven't seen before. And it's not exactly consistent with the condition I diagnosed." He looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. "There's something here that doesn't add up. I need to run a few more tests." Confusion swirled in Sarah's mind. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Isn't it just time? Isn't he dying?" Dr. Hayes hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure yet. What I do know is that this doesn't feel like the end. It's possible, just possible, that something else is going on here." He stood up and placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Let's take a closer look. I think we may have missed something. Just wait here, okay? I'll get some more tests done." Sarah sat frozen, staring at Max, who lay motionless on the table. She couldn't wrap her mind around what Dr. Hayes had just said. Something wasn't right. What could possibly be wrong if Max's body was already failing him? But a tiny flicker of hope started to stir within her chest, a cautious optimism she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. As Dr. Hayes walked out of the room, Sarah gently cradled Max's head in her lap. She whispered softly to him, trying to reassure herself as much as him. "Hold on, buddy. Just hold on a little longer." For the first time that day, she felt a glimmer of something else, something that felt like hope. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. Sarah's thoughts raced as she continued to gently stroke Max's fur, her mind replaying the vet's words over and over again. Something was wrong, something the doctors had missed. But what could it be? Could it really be possible that Max wasn't near the end after all? She shook her head, trying to calm herself, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. It felt like an eternity before Dr. Hayes returned, his expression a mixture of surprise and quiet concern. He didn't immediately speak, but he motioned for Sarah to follow him into the back room. She stood up slowly, feeling a tightness in her chest. Max's weight felt lighter in her arms than it should. And for a moment, she simply wanted to stay with him, to hold him close, and never let go. But she knew she needed answers. As they walked down the hall to the examination room, Sarah tried to steady her breathing. Is it bad news?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hayes glanced at her with a reassuring, though serious, look. "Not necessarily," he said quietly. "But it's not what we expected." He led Sarah into a small room where he had already set up the necessary equipment. He motioned for her to sit in one of the chairs, and he began to explain the situation. "We ran a series of new tests, as I mentioned before. What we found is surprising, to say the least." Sarah's heart thudded loudly in her chest. "What do you mean? What's going on with him?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her fear. Dr. Hayes took a deep breath before continuing. "The tests show that Max doesn't have the condition we originally thought. The heart failure isn't caused by the disease we diagnosed. Instead, he has a rare condition, a severe heart arrhythmia. It's the reason for his symptoms, and while it's serious, it's treatable." Sarah blinked, not quite understanding. "Treatable," she repeated, her mind trying to catch up with the words. "Yes," Dr. Hayes confirmed, his tone gentle but firm. "The arrhythmia has caused his heart to weaken, but it's something that can be managed with the right medication and care. It's been difficult to detect because it mimics the signs of end-of-life heart failure. But with the proper treatment, he has a chance to recover." Sarah's mind was spinning. For months, she had been preparing herself for the inevitable loss of her best friend. She had accepted the fact that Max was fading, and now Dr. Hayes was telling her that Max wasn't at the end of his life after all. Her throat tightened as a flood of emotions hit her all at once. Relief, confusion, guilt. "How long does he have?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "Given his age and condition, we can't promise a full recovery, but he could live for several more months, possibly even longer, with the right treatment," Dr. Hayes explained. "We'll need to start a treatment plan right away. It'll involve medication to regulate his heart, a special diet, and regular follow-ups. But the prognosis is much better than I originally thought." The words hung in the air, almost too good to be true. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of hope. She had almost lost him. And now she had a second chance. A chance to give Max the care he deserved, and to keep him by her side for even longer. It was overwhelming, and she didn't know how to process it all. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You're really saying that there's hope?" Dr. Hayes nodded, his expression softening. "Yes, Sarah. There's hope. But it's going to take work, and we need to act quickly." Sarah looked down at Max, who was resting peacefully on the examination table, his body still frail, but his breathing steady. She could hardly believe it. She had been preparing for his final moments. But now, there was a new sense of purpose. She wasn't losing him just yet. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling a rush of relief flood over her. The journey wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, Max had more time to spend by her side. The following days felt like a blur. After Dr. Hayes had explained Max's condition and the treatment options, Sarah was determined to do whatever it took to give him the best chance at recovery. She couldn't let him go, not when there was hope, not when she had just learned that his life wasn't over. Max wasn't dying from a heart failure they had thought. It was an arrhythmia, a treatable condition, but one that required immediate action. Sarah was ready to do whatever it took to bring her dog back to full health. Dr. Hayes had prescribed a series of medications to help regulate Max's heart rhythm. The pills weren't easy to administer, but Sarah found herself doing it with more care than she thought possible. She had to crush them into his food, mixing the powder with his favorite treats so that he would swallow them without protest. It felt like an endless routine at first, morning and evening doses, constant monitoring of his behavior, and a strict schedule to make sure he didn't miss a single dose. But Sarah didn't mind. Max had given her so many years of love and companionship. Now it was her turn to return the favor. In the first few days, there was little visible improvement. Max still seemed weak, still laid around most of the time, his energy levels far from what they had once been. But Sarah could feel it, a slight shift. There were moments when he looked up at her with an alertness that hadn't been there before, and his tail would wag ever so slightly when she entered the room. It was as though he was slowly coming back to life, piece by piece. Sarah was diligent with the new diet, feeding Max a special, heart-healthy formula designed to help him gain strength. She made sure to walk him every day, even if it was just a short stroll around the yard. It felt like a small victory every time he took a few more steps without tiring. Max had always loved his walks, and seeing him take an interest in even the simplest of activities again gave Sarah hope. There were setbacks along the way, of course. Some days, Max seemed to regress. His energy would dip, and he would refuse to eat, his body giving in to the fatigue that had settled in over the years. But Sarah never gave up on him. She remained by his side, constantly reassuring him, "You can do this, Max. We're in this together." One morning, after a week of treatment, something extraordinary happened. Max was lying on the couch as usual, his eyes half closed in the soft morning light. But when Sarah walked into the room, he raised his head and wagged his tail, the movement slow but unmistakable. For the first time in weeks, he was truly engaged, his eyes bright and focused on her. It wasn't much, but to Sarah, it was everything. She knelt down beside him, gently petting his head, her heart swelling with a joy she hadn't felt in so long. "You're doing it, buddy," Sarah whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're really doing it." Over the next few days, Max continued to show small but significant improvements. He started eating with more enthusiasm, his appetite returning as his strength grew. He took a few steps outside with Sarah, his movements still slow but no longer as stiff. The fresh air seemed to invigorate him, and the once lethargic dog now had moments where he'd perk up, sniffing the grass and wagging his tail in curiosity. It was as if he was rediscovering the world around him, one small step at a time. Sarah couldn't believe it. The dog she had thought she was about to lose was coming back to her. The road ahead wasn't easy, and the future was still uncertain. But with each new day, Sarah could see the spark of life returning to Max. It was a slow, steady process, but it was progress. And that was all that mattered. She spent every moment she could with him, savoring the simple things, longer walks, lazy afternoons on the couch, and quiet nights curled up together. Every day felt like a new beginning, and Sarah was determined to make the most of it. Max was more than just her dog. He was her best friend, her confidant, And now he was showing her that miracles, no matter how small, were possible. And for the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had turned a corner together. It had been a few weeks since Max's condition started to improve. The medications were working, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of relief with every little milestone Max reached. He was eating better, moving more, and even beginning to show signs of the playful spirit he had lost for so long. The bond between them had deepened over the past few days, and Sarah found herself feeling more hopeful than she had in months. However, that sense of hope would soon be tested. One morning, after a peaceful night's sleep, Sarah woke to the sound of Max whining softly in his bed. The sun had barely risen, and she rubbed her eyes, not fully awake. But then the whining became louder, and Sarah's stomach tightened with concern. It wasn't the usual sounds of Max stretching or groaning. It was something different, something unsettling. She rushed into the living room, where she found Max struggling to get up. His legs were shaky, and his body trembled slightly as he tried to move. Max had always been a strong dog, but today he seemed weak, his energy gone. His usual alertness was absent, and his eyes looked clouded and distant, as though he were confused. "Max," Sarah whispered, kneeling down beside him. She reached out to touch his head, but his fur felt colder than usual. Her heart began to pound. The progress they'd made seemed to have been wiped away in an instant. "What's going on, buddy?" Max's breathing was labored, and he let out a low whimper, his body straining with each breath. It was as if the life had been sucked out of him overnight. Sarah quickly checked his medication schedule, wondering if she had missed a dose or given him the wrong amount. Everything seemed to be in order, but the fear that had been lurking in her heart returned with a vengeance. She called Dr. Hayes immediately, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. "He's worse today. I don't know what's happening. He was doing so well, and now he can't even stand up." Dr. Hayes listened carefully, then calmly reassured her. "It's possible that Max is experiencing a temporary setback. These types of conditions can be unpredictable, and it's not uncommon for dogs to go through phases where they seem to regress. But I want to see him as soon as possible. Bring him in right away." Sarah didn't wait another moment. She quickly lifted Max into her arms, feeling the weight of his frail body in her hands. He didn't resist, his body limp and unresponsive. She hurried to the car, her heart pounding in her chest, Max's labored breaths filling the space between them. The drive to the vet felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road seemed to jolt Max's fragile frame, and Sarah could feel her panic growing. The optimistic hope she'd held onto so tightly just a few days ago was now clouded by fear and uncertainty. Had they really turned a corner, or was she simply delaying the inevitable? When they finally arrived at the vet's office, Sarah rushed in with Max cradled in her arms. The staff moved quickly, taking Max into the examination room while Sarah stood in the waiting area, her mind reeling with worst-case scenarios. Time seemed to stand still as she waited for Dr. Hayes. She prayed for some sign, any sign, that Max would be okay. She couldn't lose him. Not after everything they had gone through together. She wasn't ready to let go. Finally, Dr. Hayes emerged from the room, his face a little graver than before. Sarah's heart sank as he approached her, but his words weren't what she had expected. "Sarah," he said softly, "Max's arrhythmia has worsened, but it's not as bad as we feared. We can adjust his medication. I think with the right changes, he will bounce back. But we need to move quickly." For the first time in hours, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the end, just another obstacle. And she would face it, just like she had faced everything else, with Max by her side. Dr. Hayes' words were a lifeline, a promise that Max still had a chance, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy. The setback had shaken her, but she wasn't ready to give up. Max had fought so hard to come back, and she would fight with him. If it meant adjusting his medication and pushing through the tough days, Sarah was willing to do whatever it took to help him recover. Dr. Hayes immediately started Max on a new treatment plan. The new medications were stronger, designed to help regulate his heart more effectively and give him the energy he had lost. But the road to recovery was never straight, and Max would need to be carefully monitored. The vet recommended daily checkups and tests to ensure the new plan was working. Max's body was older, his heart weaker, and the recovery would take time. Sarah wasn't afraid of the work ahead. In fact, she threw herself into it with a determination that surprised even her. Every day, she kept track of Max's symptoms, noting his appetite, his energy levels, and his behavior. She gave him his medication on time, without fail, and kept him as comfortable as possible. It was exhausting, but Sarah didn't mind. It felt good to be doing something, to be actively helping him heal instead of just waiting for the inevitable. But as the days passed, Sarah noticed something that made her both hopeful and apprehensive. Max started showing signs of improvement again, but it was slow. His once weak movements were becoming a bit more deliberate, though still cautious. He was eating with more enthusiasm, and the sparkle in his eyes that had been missing for so long began to return. Yet each small step forward was accompanied by a lingering uncertainty. What if this improvement didn't last? What if, like before, the progress was only temporary? Max's first real breakthrough came one morning when Sarah opened the door to find him standing in the living room, his tail wagging gently as he watched her enter. It was a simple moment, just a dog standing. But to Sarah, it was a miracle. She had forgotten what it felt like to see him stand tall, to see the familiar wag of his tail, a gesture that always meant excitement or affection. "Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" He wagged his tail a little more, as if to answer her, and then he slowly padded over to her, his steps still a bit unsteady, but strong enough to move with purpose. Sarah crouched down, tears filling her eyes. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady thump of his heart. For a moment, she just held him, allowing herself to feel the depth of their connection and the immense relief that washed over her. As Max's recovery continued, Sarah began to take him for longer walks. He was still slower than he used to be, but each walk brought with it a new sense of freedom for both of them. The weather had started to warm, and the sun felt good on their faces as they walked through the neighborhood, side by side. Max's steps were tentative at first, but with each day, he seemed to gain more confidence. The world outside was still as vibrant as it had been before, and it was as though Max was rediscovering his place in it, one small step at a time. But the fear that lingered in Sarah's heart never fully disappeared. She knew that Max's condition could relapse at any time. She had come to terms with the reality that his health was fragile, but she also knew that as long as he had the will to fight, she would be there to fight alongside him. Every step he took, no matter how small, was a victory in their battle against time. The days began to feel brighter, filled with more moments of joy than worry. But Sarah remained vigilant, always watching, always waiting for the next change, knowing that Max's journey was far from over. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that the worst was behind them. And no matter what came next, she would be there for him, just as he had always been there for her. The weeks continued to pass, and Sarah found herself watching Max with a renewed sense of awe. Each day, she saw more of the dog she had almost lost. His playful spirit, his curious eyes, his joy in the simplest things. Though Max still had his moments of weakness, his condition was stabilizing, and with each passing day, it felt like the darkest days were slipping further away. Max's energy had returned in fits and bursts, but it was enough to remind Sarah that hope wasn't a fleeting dream. It was their reality. He no longer needed constant support to stand or walk, and his tail wagged with more enthusiasm every time he saw Sarah. The bond they shared deepened even further, strengthened by the hardships they had endured together. Every small victory, from a simple walk around the block to a joyful bark at a passing squirrel, was a testament to their unwavering connection. But Sarah wasn't blind to the fragility of their situation. She knew the road ahead could still hold surprises. perhaps not all of them pleasant. Max's condition was delicate, and as the vet had said, things could change unexpectedly. But Sarah chose not to dwell on the what-ifs. Instead, she focused on the present, cherishing every moment she had with him. It wasn't just the medical progress that gave Sarah hope. It was the small, everyday moments that reminded her of why she loved him so much. The way he would nuzzle into her lap when she sat down, the way he'd follow her around the house as if he were making sure she was safe, and the way his presence, no matter how still or quiet, made her feel less alone. In those simple gestures, Sarah found the strength to push through any uncertainty, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel peace. One afternoon, after a particularly good walk in the park, Sarah sat down on a bench, Max at her side, his head resting on her knee. The sun was warm, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly bloomed flowers. It was a perfect moment, one she had almost given up on having again. Max's breathing was steady, and he seemed content, his eyes soft as he looked up at her. Sarah couldn't help but smile, the tears that had once been a constant presence now replaced with gratitude. "You've come so far, haven't you, buddy?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Max gave a soft bark, as though in agreement, and nudged her hand with his nose. Sarah chuckled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. Max's fight wasn't just physical. It had been a fight of love, resilience, and trust. It was the love between them that had carried him through the darkest moments, and it was that love that continued to fuel his recovery. Sarah realized, in that moment, that no matter what came next, she had already won. She had won in the sense that she had not given up on him. And Max had returned that love in ways words could never capture. The vet's visits had become less frequent, and the updates on Max's condition were more positive than ever before. It seemed as though the worst was behind them. But even so, Sarah had learned not to take anything for granted. She would continue to cherish every moment with Max, never letting her heart stray from the truth that life, no matter how fragile, was worth fighting for. They walked home that day, side by side, both of them stronger, more connected, and more alive than ever. Sarah knew that, no matter what the future held, their bond was unbreakable. In the quiet of that afternoon, as the world continued on around them, Sarah realized that love, in all its forms, could heal even the deepest wounds. And together, they had proven it.